Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Gunshine State, where we talk about firearms policy, Second Amendment civil rights advocacy, right here in the great state of Florida. So please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends can join in the conversation. Please make it a point also to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, as well as follow us on Instagram. And in the case of Facebook and YouTube, make sure you hit the notification button. That way you can participate. You can get notifications as soon as we go live, and you can participate in the live chat as the program is happening. Now, I also want to encourage you, if you're not already a member of Florida Carry, please take a moment, follow the join link in the description of this video, and become a member. Florida Carry is Florida's premier Second Amendment civil rights advocacy groups. We are working on your behalf to fight for your right to keep and bear arms in the great state of Florida. So please take a moment, become a member, and join the fight. We cannot do it without you. Just follow the link in the description of this video. All right, let's get into today's topic. Now, one of the things I've come to notice when it comes to gun rights and being a part of the gun rights community is there's just one area where there seems to be a bit of divide. And that area has to do with the role that law enforcement plays in the gun rights community. You have those who, for some reason, seem to think that law enforcement is just flat out the enemy, that all law enforcement, whether they're sheriffs or police chiefs or their rank and file law enforcement officers, are anti-gun and want to take away our Second Amendment rights. On the other end, you have people who think that, well, just because someone is law enforcement, well, they must be pro-gun or they must support our rights. I have found, and in my experience, that, well, by the way, there are individuals who are anywhere along that spectrum. People believe that law enforcement falls anywhere in that spectrum. What I have found, and my experience has been that it's rank and file law enforcement officers. And studies and polls have been done to show this. The rank and file law enforcement officers are generally in favor of the Second Amendment, of our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. We have found that that attitude, as you move up in leadership, whether it's on the union side or whether it's as an elected sheriff or as an appointed police chief, who's then at the whim of whatever city council they're representing, that position may or may not change. But what I wanted to do today was I wanted to bring a couple of guys on the program who have a lot of experience both in the gun rights community or the Second Amendment advocacy community, but also in law enforcement, to kind of talk about this whole discussion from their perspective, from a law enforcement perspective. And so with that, I want to invite the folks from Arms Room Radio, Mr. Mike Piwowarski and Major Bill. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Hey, Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I see that you guys are COVID-19 social distancing compliant. Major Bill, you are doing it in practice. Mike, well, at least you're there in spirit.
Yeah, well, being here in South Florida, in one of the epicenters for COVID-19, you got to take all the protections you can.
Mike, I think you missed something in translation.
Hey, I got told to wear a mask. I'm wearing a mask.
Oh, Jesus. We're gonna pray for you, Mike. We'll pray for you.
Hey, what did the Lone Ranger wear?
He wore a mask.
Hi-oh Silver.
All right, gentlemen. So we talked a little bit about today. I mean, you saw the intro for today's topic. The fact is, in the gun rights community, there is a divide. There are those people who are supportive of law enforcement, and there are those people who think of law enforcement as the enemy. I don't know. I mean, first of all, what do you guys think, first and foremost, just about that divide in the first place and the fact that it exists? Major Bill, I'll start with you, since you probably are the preeminent expert right now on at least here on this program, coming from a law enforcement perspective.
Well, yes, there is that divide, and you have the people that hate law enforcement, and you have other people that are on one of the fringe groups that see law enforcement as an occupying force, which we are not, but they are viewed that way. And some departments are more militarized than others. So it does give that impression. But, one of the responsibilities for law enforcement is to keep peace and civil order. And sometimes with your field force units or your rapid response teams, quick reaction forces, they are more militaristic than your regular cop on the beat.
All right. So, all right, now, Mike, you're in an interesting spot because you both work with a lot of people in the gun rights community, and you do a lot of work with law enforcement. What do you see as misconceptions about that people on both sides have about the other, and what are some things that you see that are probably that they might have pretty accurate?
Well, and I think, listen, Major Bill's spot on, right where he's going. But I think it starts back from a source, and I know he'll jump back into it, some of the training aspects of it, where we come from. We happen to be sitting with you from Florida, obviously, and Florida is one of those 5 states that doesn't have open carry. So our law enforcement traditionally has had to deal with it differently since the laws changed about carrying concealed carry or open carrying since 1986. And again, I don't want to jump on his bandwagon there. He'll take that. But what I see here a lot in Florida is, listen, for the most part, those of us that are pro-Constitution, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, listen, pro-all amendments, in my opinion, I'm pro-Constitution. Second Amendment just happens to be, one of the very important ones to me, is that, if you stand up for your rights and you go to a protest, you're seen as a fringe person. And a lot of those fringe personnel, those sovereign citizen kind of people, those separatists, they hate all police. They hate all government. They hate everything else. And so I believe at some point those lines have gotten blurred. Whereas if you're a diehard pro-Second Amendment guy, you're also anti-law enforcement. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And I'll tell you that in my many years of law enforcement, not as many as Major Bill, I want to clarify that. That guy's old. But in my many years in law enforcement, there's 2 kinds of cop out there. There's pro-gun, and then there's those that have not been educated yet. And that's where I want to hand that back to him with the training. Again, we've been, in Florida, having been only one of 5 states that doesn't have open carry, we've been able to teach our law enforcement any gun's a bad gun. If you get called to a gun scene, it's a bad gun, because they've never had to deal with visually seeing a good guy with a gun before. They don't have to do that here.
And that's an interesting perspective, and that's one of the conversations that I've had, is that I think one of the biggest challenges that many in law enforcement have is being trained and knowing and understanding the law relating to firearms and open carry. In California, I cannot tell you the number of times we've literally had law enforcement arrest people and confiscate firearms for things that were not crimes. And it's, what a lot of people don't realize is cops aren't lawyers, and the amount of the penal code that law enforcement have to know, if they were to know all law, I mean, that's a lot. But one would think, in particular now in the state of Florida, that especially after a few high-profile incidents, as well as folks like Florida Carry sending letters to law enforcement, that they would put a greater impetus on training law enforcement to know and understand some of these laws. Would you agree, Major Bill?
Yeah, and Craig, I went to the academy in the 80s, and like what Mike said, is we were taught, we're one of the states that does not have open carry. We had a loophole back in, I think it was like 87, that people were open carrying for about a week, and they closed that off. But yeah, we don't have open carry, so when you respond to a gun call, it's usually because it's somebody who's bad that has a gun. We just now, in the last session of the Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission, have actually gotten into lawful carry and display of firearms in the police academy. This is the first time in 30 years that we're actually finally addressing it in the police academy. Our academy is 6 months long. We have a 16-week field training program after that, and then the officers are cut loose. And it's exactly what you said. We're not lawyers. We have a huge statute book, and for us to know these obscure statutes that we have in Florida is slim to none. and you have different organizations that go out there and, in their mind, trying to educate law enforcement by doing something where they can legally open carry, such as fishing, hunting, traveling to and from a range. They do it more to have a confrontation moment than to actually educate the officers on what the law is. And that's where we need to have that change.
Well, so Florida Carry has been an entity that's hosted a number of those events. And, Florida Carry makes it a point to contact local law enforcement and let them know that that's something that they're going to do. And in most of the cases, the event goes on without incident. What I think the challenge sometimes is that you have some higher ups, and when I say higher ups, I mean you have some elected sheriffs and you have some police chiefs who are following the bidding of a city council, who are not necessarily on our side, shall we say. And I think the problem is that those individuals, their attitudes people wind up taking all law enforcement and saying, oh, well, that's their attitude towards it. I can tell you that my experience has been that well over 85 to 90% of rank and file law enforcement officers are pro Second Amendment, because they realize that even though they may have the right to carry a firearm, they want to protect the rights of their spouses, of their family members, of their friends to be able to defend themselves. Where I find that you sometimes wind up, it gets kind of sketchy is, number one, once again, some of the sheriffs, not all of them, not even most of them, but some of them, and then some of the police chiefs who may personally be pro Second Amendment, but they're appointed by a city council that may or may not support the Second Amendment. And then the final one is, sometimes you have some of the union bosses, the union leadership or representation, who go into legislatures, and when the legislature is about to pass or put forth an anti-gun bill, they get law enforcement to remove their opposition by saying, okay, we're going to exempt your members. Would either of you disagree kind of with that assessment? And if so, why? Or how?
Craig, let me give you this. Florida suffers from. Hold on. Let me jump off track. Let me give you this. I'm going to use Chuck Yeager as an example here. You ever been on an airplane and you get on the airplane and you just think something's wrong? There's a little bump. Why is it taking so long for us to delay? And then the pilot comes on and says, "Hey, folks, how's everybody doing today? I just want to let you know we're going to be dealing with some maintenance issues, and we're going to be taking care of this, and then we're going to be rolling out." Or you're flying over the Grand Canyon, and the guy comes on and tells you, "Hey, folks, here we are today. We're just going to be, if you look out your left window, we're at 30,000 feet. You could see the Grand Canyon." That all comes from Chuck Yeager. Aviation could draw back every pilot talking because they want to sound as cool as West Virginia Chuck Yeager. Well, let me tell you about law enforcement in Florida. Law enforcement in Florida started from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. Everything in South Florida law enforcement, everything in Central Florida law enforcement at this day draws its traditions back to them. The same way as Northeastern law enforcement draws its traditions from Sir Robert Peel over in England, Florida law enforcement draws its tradition from Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. So now that those bosses are down here and into the second and third generation, they were taught growing up in those inner cities, in those cities, how bad law enforcement is with firearms. How bad firearms are. So they deal with firearms a certain way. And Florida has got that poison passed on to them, how bad firearms are. Major Bill started to talk to you about how the police academies now, after 30 years, it's been actually been 34 years since we've had concealed carry issued here in Florida. Just last year, they're starting to address in the academy. And I'm going to give credit where credit's due. It's a friend of both of ours, a retired police sheriff's commander, Chris Wagner, who's gotten that in there. It's been his mission for day after day, year after year to get that in. So Florida suffers from old tradition and old policy when they see a gun. Oh, my goodness, it's a gun. Hey, boy, I need you to get on the ground. And that's old school thinking that we've got down here. It's been carried on from generation to generation in law enforcement. Bill and I are, listen, depending on how you want to define it, in our watching our second and third generation of law enforcement roll through Florida right now. And that aspect has just started to change in the past year, like the Major said.
Mm. Wow. What do you think about that, Major?
No, it's absolutely true. And now we're having officers that are seeing people with firearms. I mean, Florida has the largest amount of concealed carry permit holders in the United States. So we are running across it. We're dealing with it. And now we're finally bringing the education portion into it. And you have groups like Florida Carry that are out there trying to educate law enforcement, but you have those other fringe groups that their idea of educating officers is to get into a confrontation. And that's the last thing you need to do when you have a gun and the cop has a gun, is have it as a confrontational nature. That's why we're now teaching it in the police academy. We're doing roll call trainings. I know in my department and in South Florida, we're educating officers on what they can do with somebody who is a concealed carry permit. And if we ever go to constitutional carry or open carry here in the state of Florida, that's going to require a whole nother educational process for law enforcement. We can only enforce what we know, and if they don't have the training in it, which up until last year, like we both said, and thanks to Chris Wagner for that, unless you were a gun guy, like Mike and I grew up together, we were gun guys. So we knew what we could do, and we dealt with people. And you came across somebody, hey, I got a gun, I got a concealed permit. Okay, do me a favor. You leave it in your holster, I'll leave mine in my holster, and we'll be just fine. And you never have a problem with that.
It's great that you say that because, once again, my experience with law enforcement has always been, well, let me clarify, it hasn't always been like that. When I was a youngster, if I felt like I got pulled over for no reason, I was confrontational. And it generally ended up with, me sitting on the curb while they were searching my car. And, it wasn't a good experience. But as I got older, I realized, look, they just want to go home okay, and they just want to do their job. If I'm not confrontational, they won't be confrontational. If I de-escalate, they'll de-escalate. And
most cops are going to react to how a person presents themselves. And if they present themselves in an aggressive manner, we're going to protect ourselves. Like you said, I'm going home to my family.
Right.
And the old adage, Mike, remember when we first started, well, I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. So when you introduce a firearm into the equation, and every stop that an officer makes, every stop that a deputy, a trooper, whatever, there's always a gun involved because there's always a gun that the officer has. So we're reacting to that. No, I'm not saying that there aren't cops out there that, when they were in middle school and they got the milk money stolen from them, that they're out there with a chip on their shoulder and they have an agenda. It's in every occupation. But the great majority of law enforcement isn't like that.
You just hit the nail on the head. And I'm like, all right, so everyone in no matter what the profession, cops are like everybody else. You have a percentage of the people who are really nice and really good at their job. And you have a percentage that are jerks and not very good at their job. And chances are you're going to run into both when you're out there. And so to try and label everyone with either the good label or the bad label. I remember one time I got kicked off a jury because I told the prosecutor, I said, no, I don't just assume that the cop is telling the truth. Because I don't assume that the defendant is telling the truth. Because guess what? We're all human.
Craig, I'll say this. And I'll tell you that number is even less in law enforcement. Whereas any job you go to, listen, unless you're talking about a doctor who's got to go 7 years of medical training and then do internship and everything after that, that kind of, you can weed out whether that guy knows what he's talking about or not. Law enforcement, the background check, the interview process to go through that is 6 months, a year long. Listen, I love my fellow truck drivers, those guys out, I love my friends that are truck drivers. They do incredible stuff, but you walk in the door with a CDL and they're going to hand you the keys as long as you don't have a warrant for your arrest. There's a much smaller population, much smaller percentage of law enforcement that are, I would say, bad law enforcement. That maybe they got a crap attitude, but you know what? Everybody has a crap attitude when you wake up. But as far as those that are bad cops, it's so minor. So I tend to get a little upset when I see a lot of people go out there and say, "Oh, look at the stormtroopers doing this again." You know what? Let me tell you something. I'll give you a little secret. The major, he may nod his head. He may not be able to say it because he's still getting actively paid as a cop, and I'm not. That we'll deal with that on our own. Listen, I'm going to call him out right now. The Greenville Police Department in Mississippi just went through, at a mayor's orders, went through a church parking lot, citing people for not social distancing as they were listening to the church service on an FM radio in their car, old drive-through style. They went out handing out tickets. Let me tell you something. Any one of them Greenville cops tries to go get hired at the sheriff's office or the Mississippi State Police there, is going to have a very, very hard time, because every one of those people that at those agencies, those other agencies, know, I don't want this guy that's willing to take any order to go violate somebody's civil rights, that doesn't know the difference between an unethical and immoral or an illegal order. Those guys are going to be hard pressed to get a backup from a neighboring agency over a routine call in the future, because cops are just, we are patriots, and we have taken an oath, and that oath means something to us. We're not all stormtroopers, and a lot of times internally we'll deal with that ourselves and make sure those guys know, hey, you screwed the pooch here. You're not in the club.
All right. So let me here'll be my final question. So when it comes to the gun rights movement, what's the best perspective to take when it comes to dealing with law enforcement, whether you're open carrying in Florida as a part of is you're allowed to do under law for a if you're fishing or you're hunting, or if you have a concealed carry permit and you get pulled over by law enforcement. What's the best kind of general attitude to take? What would you recommend? How would you recommend someone deal with that particular experience? Whichever one of you want to go first.
Major. This is him.
Well, like with anything else, we are going to be a reflection of the person that we're dealing with. Whether you have a concealed permit and you want to tell the officer, hey, I have a weapon, you know what? That's probably your best bet. Officers that are educated about it, they're going to do exactly what I said. Hey, you leave it in your holster, I'll leave it in my holster, and we'll both be just fine. This is why I pulled you over. This is why I'm stopping you. Be respectful. If you're at a situation like a hunting or a fishing and you get stopped and they're open carrying, make sure that you know the law. Be respectful. Advise the officer, hey, officer, based on Florida statute such and such, I'm allowed to do this. I would ask kindly that you look it up before we have anything further. Most of all, just comply. There's other ways to take care of it down the road. You don't need to argue about it right there. If the officer seizes your weapon or they take it, yes, we have our rights, but we also have ways in which to deal with it on the back end. Don't get into a confrontation. That's just going to make things worse.
You want to add anything to that, Mike?
Listen, I'll just say this, and like Bill was saying, you've got two kinds of officers as far as I'm concerned. Those that are educated about the Second Amendment, that understand it, they know what the oath means, and those that have not been taught that yet, those that have not had the awakening. There are no anti-gun cops out there. Maybe there's one or two, just like in a very small piece of the population you would have. But what you have is cops that are educated about the Second Amendment and cops that have not yet been educated. There are very few, I'll say that, very, very few anti-gun cops. Now, there's anti-shoot me with your gun cops. That's all of them, okay? But as far as the policy of anti-gun, no. There's those that have been educated and understand, and those that have yet to have the awakening. And that's what organizations like Florida Carry and the Arms Room Radio do, is try to help that process along.
You know what I was going to tell you, and I was going to share this. The number of either active duty or retired law enforcement that are active and fighting in the gun rights community is astronomical. Yeah. There's a bunch of them. And so that's the reason why, for me, it's so hard for me to look at law enforcement as law enforcement represented as anti-gun, because there are a lot of them that are actually in the fight, fighting toe to toe, fighting shoulder to shoulder with us. And so I think it's important that we I just think that some of the folks who are real quick to call cops anti-gun or say all cops are anti-gun, I'm sorry, but I'm not going there with you. And you can disagree with me, or
this one just joined me.
Okay. Anyway, hey, by the way, just do me a favor. Let folks know about Arms Room Radio. Where can they listen to it? What are some of the things you guys do, talk about? Who are the faces, the voices, I guess, of Arms Room Radio?
Listen, our Arms Room Radio is nationally syndicated radio. You can listen to us 25 stations around the country. You can hear us all the time on armsroomradio.com. You can go there and listen to the actual radio broadcast when we're live Saturdays, 3 to 5 p.m. We've got 100,000 listeners a week is what they're telling us that we've got. We do 2 hours of all things gun, all the gun time. because of our military and law enforcement backgrounds, we tend to focus a lot from, that side of it. And listening to myself and Major Bill here, you can kind of get that feeling. And listen, once a week, Major Bill comes on. We do a little segment called the Fallen Hero segment, which we honor basically a fallen hero from law enforcement, military, first responder, whatever it happens to be. And then Major Bill picks a topic, and we go along and we listen to what he has to say. And a lot of it is, he's done a lot of Florida man stuff, but he's done a lot of education on what law enforcement is doing around the country. In fact, I think this last week we talked about some agencies that were not so quick to help their first responders when they actually contracted the COVID-19. So, listen, we're not all just patting each other on the back here. We're trying to bring up real issues to talk to you about. And the Major is he's our chief law enforcement officer on the program, and it's been a pleasure having him on for the past, 5.5, 6 years.
And you guys are based right there out of Orlando, Florida, right?
Yep, yes we are.
That's what I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure our folks at Florida Carry knew y'all are homers.
Yeah, we also have we got Earl Boone, the great grandson of Daniel Boone, and then we have the legal ninja, the courtroom assassin. I hope I get that right. Maximum Effort, Kevin Maxwell, as our legal advisor.
Yeah, I enjoy you guys. First of all, I always enjoy being on the program. When I'm not on the program, I enjoy listening. And every once in a while, you guys actually do talk about guns. Usually, it's cracking on each other, but every once in a while, we do get some gun conversation.
We try to make it a point. It's like Kevin says, it's kind of it's more of a policy than a rule.
Yeah, it's a guideline.
Guideline.
Right.
There we go. It's a guideline. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for coming on the program, and hope to have you guys on again real soon.
Thanks a lot, Craig. I appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you, Craig. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Piwowarski and Major Bill from Arms Room Radio. Gentlemen, take care. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of the Gunshine State. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing this program, telling your friends about Florida Carry. Also, once again, I want to remind you, if you haven't already done so, please become a member. Join us in the fight for our right to keep and bear arms. Let me tell you something, folks. If these are our fundamental civil rights, and if we don't use them, we're going to lose them. So let's make sure that we use them. Anyway, you guys, take care. We'll talk to you again real soon.